Hi, everybody. My name is Paula Price, and I'm a former practicing lawyer and certified executive coach. And I'm here today with Kimberley Ho, who's the National Director of Professional Recruiting at BLG in Calgary, and Andrea Rayment, who's the Director of Professional Development in Clark Wilson. And we're presenting virtual recruitment for law students in Vancouver and Toronto. Welcome. This is a presentation that we've created for students. So these are students who, like you, are going through the recruitment process in various cities across Canada, particularly Vancouver and Toronto. What you can expect today, we've got the presentation prepared. We expect to be about 60 minutes. And we have really three topics that we're going to be talking about. The first is the Calgary experience. Kimberley went through the recruit in I think it was September, October of last year. And so she has some experience to be drawn from in the virtual recruitment process. That was the first time her firm had done the OCI and in-firm interviews virtually. We're also going to talk about substantive preparations. So looking at the types of questions that you can expect to hear during an interview process and how you can prepare. And then virtual etiquette. So what are some of the things that you can think about as you're engaging on screen? We encourage you to participate in the webinar. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. You can submit your question anonymously. And if you see a question that you like that somebody else has posed, feel free to upvote the question. The more votes a question gets, the higher it ranks, and those are the ones that we'll turn to first. There's also a chat function, which you're welcome to use for chatting or leaving comments. I will not be looking at the chat function as we go through the webinar. So if you want a question to appear on the list that we'll see, please put it on the Q&A. Before we get started with the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm based in Vancouver, BC, and I acknowledge that as the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Our speakers and our guests join us from across Canada. There are students who signed up from all over, and I'd like to extend that acknowledgement as it applies to all of us who have joined this virtual gathering. I would also like to extend my acknowledgements to all the students who are going through this process. You are going through law school and going through recruitment in the most unusual times. And I just wanted to extend my acknowledgement and also of that, and also of you being here today, of taking the time to really do what you can to prepare yourself for this upcoming recruitment season. I'd like to also thank those who are supporting the students in that process. So the career advisors at the various law schools across Canada and the professional development directors at law firms across Canada who are navigating this process as well. And finally, I would like to acknowledge our speakers who are with us today. We have Andrea, who I mentioned earlier, is the Director of Professional Development at Clark Wilson in Vancouver. Andrea has a long and rich history. She's a former practicing lawyer, and she has a rich history in the professional development space for lawyers. And she's at Clark Wilson now, and they are preparing for their first virtual recruit coming up in just a few weeks. So hi, Andrea. So nice to see you.
Thank you. You too, Paula. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and for a break from reviewing applications, which is where I'm at right now. Piles and piles of them. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Andrea, so how are you doing?
You know, I'm okay. And I was just thinking really how I'm doing is probably how I expect a lot of students are doing, especially if you're kind of feeding into the same recruit I am in Vancouver, which is really taking one step at a time. You know, we're focusing on thinking about who we're hoping to meet during the OCI process. And I'm trying really hard to push other things out of my mind, like how are we going to manage those OCIs exactly? Are we going to have people greeting students at the beginning? How will in-firms be structured? There's all these new things to think about in the virtual space. but I'm just trying to focus right now on getting ready for OCIs, and then we'll worry about each of those things as we go. So I'm really glad to hear more about from Kim about how she's managed it, because I'll get to those worries in time. Yeah.
Fabulous. One step at a time is how we're operating these days.
That's right. It's a
Thank you
cliche
so much.
for a reason. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. And Kimberly, so Kimberley Ho is the National Director of Professional Recruiting at BLG in Alberta. And Kimberly she's involved with the students. She's overseeing a team across Canada, all of which I understand are recruiting at the moment or about to recruit. And Kimberly is about to embark on another round of recruitment, and she's got one under her belt. So she had that virtual experience in Calgary. So Kim, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. I like Andrea, I welcome the opportunity, and it's my pleasure to be able to speak to students now as you're preparing for Vancouver and Toronto. And I just want to tell students, take a big collective deep breath. It's all going to work out okay. And the good thing about going through this process, especially for Vancouver and Toronto, it's new for everybody. So just really being kind to each other, being flexible and adaptable, and know that it's all going to work out. And we will find ways to meet you if there's something that goes awry. So it's okay. It's all about your reaction to things. And we encourage everyone to just keep a positive attitude through all of this. We're all going to get through it together.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. We're going to turn now to the Q&A portion. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention that Kimberly and Andrea joined me in September, right before the Calgary recruit. And we have a recorded webinar where they talk about a lot of the OCI and in-firm interview process. And so I encourage you to watch that video. I'll send a link out to those who registered for today's webinar, because they cover a lot of the substantive type of questions that you can expect to hear, and general advice on how to prepare for this process. So I'll share that with you. And I imagine some of you are return guests. To see them speak again, they're just really amazing. So with that, we're going to turn to the questions. These are questions that we've prepared for you. And we're going to begin with the first section, which is the Calgary experience. So Kimberly, this question is for you. Would you be able to explain how the virtual OCI and virtual in-firm process worked?
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. And with regards to the Calgary process, we did go through the OCI process again, and it ran as its normal course, actually. So, each of the schools set their dates for the OCIs. We submitted our student lists to the school. So it really actually ran very seamlessly. The big difference was that we didn't necessarily send teams to go meet the students, but we did it all in a virtual platform. From the perspective of students and our lawyers involved in the process, it really was an organic, natural, like none of this is organic and natural, let's face it. But at the same time, they found it emulated the experience as best as you could through a virtual platform. And I think the students and the lawyers were able to have good, positive experiences resulting from that process. So I don't think it necessarily hurt anything in terms of the OCI process. It still was very much in place. It ran really well. There was no like major glitches in any of the platforms, so we could actually just work. And if there was a glitch, then we could adapt and arrange to meet a student after that OCI, depending on how things went. With regards to the in-firms, it was again scheduling the students. Luckily, in Calgary we had the benefit, and it's not, I know not every market has the luxury of having this kind of timing, but in Calgary we had 2 weeks to do our in-firms. So we had the luxury of time to be able to schedule students appropriately and continue to build those relationships with the firm, so we could schedule additional conversations through that process. So we had that, but for Vancouver and Toronto, it's going to be fast and furious, and the scheduling. So it's really making sure that you're staying on top of, like, what's coming into your inbox, that sort of thing, and being responsive is going to be really important for all students and firms, to be honest. And then engagement beyond the interviews involved a lot of conversations. And I just encourage students to think about, like, what is it and what information do you need from each of the firms so that you can make a good decision for yourself. And so don't be afraid to ask for those conversations. If there's anybody in particular you want to speak with, a different practice group, junior level associates, just to talk about development, mentorship, what did that look like? And don't hesitate to make those asks and have those conversations. And at the end of the day, we had a very successful recruit, and we were lucky that we got some fantastic students. And it's just a matter of, like, adjusting as best as we can from the student perspective and the firm perspective to create as best a virtual experience as possible. Were there challenges? Yes, because it was one of those things where, as a firm, we just didn't know how to engage with students in a meaningful way on a virtual platform. But I still think, the conversations were the essential piece to all of that. And I don't think that's any different from any recruit. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the 2L recruit went in Calgary.
Yeah, and it sounds like, thank you, Kim. It sounds like much of the process was the same in the sense of how things work and the importance for students to find the information that they need, to ask, to meet with other lawyers, to learn as much as they can so that they're making the best decision for themselves. It sounds like those characteristics are the same as the in-person interview process, but with this new platform. So looking at how it unfolded virtually versus the in-person, what would you say were some of the main differences between a typical recruit and what you experienced last fall?
I think generally a lot of the challenges might have come on the technical side of things. So making sure that you've tested the platform, your surroundings were, and I know we'll get into that, but just making sure that there's no distractions, making sure that your Wi-Fi connection, that your microphone works, your camera works, all of those sorts of things are in place, because you don't want to have those extra distractions retracting from the message that you're trying to portray to the firm. And on the flip side, you want to make sure that you're going to alleviate any of those distractions so the firm can actually hear what you're saying, so that we're engaged, that we're listening, and we're really trying to understand and learn about you as a candidate. So just removing all of those distractions are really helpful. And I know it's, for some students through the process, it was extremely frustrating because connections kept going out, and it just overall really took away from the experience. And then it's just another layer of anxiety for the student that you don't experience in an actual in-person OCI. So just being really mindful of making sure you test all of those things and connections are good prior to going into the process.
Absolutely. I think anybody who has been, well, all of us online, that piece of it, that just the actual physical connection or being able to do that is so important. And at the same time, I've been on webinars where there has been the tech glitch, and I'm always so impressed when people navigate that with grace. And so I think for students, we can be okay with these types of things happening. We're going to have glitches, but how you handle those glitches, I imagine, would have quite an impact on the person that you're interviewing with as well. So
I'd love to chime in though and just say, in case anyone's out there feeling like, oh my goodness, there's this whole extra layer of stuff I need to deal with around technology. In a way, it's just from my view, it's just a different layer. And, if you were doing OCIs in some ballroom in a hotel somewhere, you'd have a different set of things to worry about. Many of you haven't done OCIs before. And so you don't know, and you don't even really need to know, but you'd be worrying about different stuff. Like, how do I make sure that I get there on time? You know, what are the bus schedules? How many alarms do I need to set? Do I have an extra pair of stockings or shoe polish with me? You know, you've got all, I know it sounds crazy, but there's a different set of concerns and vibes with you. How am I going to review details about a firm before each of my little 17-minute interviews? And so instead of that, now you've got sort of tech and making sure that you're set up beautifully in your personal space. It's just different. And in a way, it's you're preparing for something that you've already been doing for 10 months. You all know how to take a breath and make sure that your tech space is set up well, because you've had to do it already. You're better equipped than you would be to rock up in a kick-ass suit, ready to go in a live interview, potentially. So I just want to be reassuring there.
It's a very excellent point, Andrea, and I love that you use shoe polish as an example, because I don't know how many of us who are working remotely are wearing polishable shoes these days. And I say that in a very positive way. I'm grateful for it. So that's really useful, and I totally agree. Kimberley, going back to the differences between the virtual and the in-person, one of the things that we had talked about earlier when we were prepping for today was this idea of engagement. And I'm just wondering what comments you might have on students in terms of their presentation on online.
In terms of engaging with the firm, Paula?
I guess one of the things that we talked about was that the creating engagement virtually was that element of it was different from the in-person, that without the body language that you might have in a room together, there requires, I think, a different skill set in being able to engage online.
No, agreed. And I think you know, what we've removed, and maybe to the benefit of the process, is a lot of the social nuances that we would normally, that would be part of the OCI process, whether it's the dinners or whatever that might look like. It looked very, very different virtually. So how did that look for us? It's like we still tried to do a really good mix of some social aspects where students got to meet other students and lawyers in a sort of more social environment, but carving out the piece too, to making sure that we had meaningful one-on-one conversations between our practitioners and the students. And we really wanted to make sure that students felt valued in the process. And so what did that look like? It differed from firm to firm in terms of what that engagement looked like. And student experiences through the process looked very different depending on the firm. And our approach was like really trying to keep more meaningful, intimate kind of gatherings and sort of that relationship building. But every firm approached it very, very differently, and how students reacted and resonated with all that was very different. But the key to all of that is making sure that you're still maintaining an understanding and learning about the firm and what are the differences between the firms. And the differences between the firms largely fell, because you know, at first when you're doing your research, we all generally do similar work. The clientele is very similar, but the differences become a lot more apparent with your engagement with the firm. It's the conversations, the people you're meeting. What are they saying? What are the messages that they're talking to you about that's absolutely resonating with you, whether or not it's mentorship, professional development, diversity and inclusion? What does that look like? And so those are going to be really important for the student to be mindful of as they're going into all of these interviews and engaging in further activities with the firm. Is you've got to be thinking about, what does your career look like in a firm going forward? What's important to you? And then asking those questions. And if you're not getting answers, then ask to meet with people who then can tell you what it's like in the firm. So that's what I think meaningful engagement looks like in this virtual process. And, you know, we can still have these one-on-one virtual conversations. We can still have phone calls, it's no different than any other recruit from my perspective.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kimberly. It's quite inspiring. This really getting to really doing that investigative work on the part of the student to figure out exactly what's going on and what works best for them. Andrea, you are about to do your first virtual recruit. And so how are things looking for you? What types of things are you thinking about as you get closer to that?
Well, as I said before, I'm really focused right now on OCIs, and I agree with Kimberly. I think it's going to look the same as it always looked. For those who haven't done it, OCIs were already really weird, right? You're in a big room and you go in, you open up a curtain at an appointed time and you sit down in quite a small space that we can no longer really imagine, and sit down for a 17-minute conversation, and then you open up the curtains, leave, and go into another. Like, it's already weird. And so fortunately, we're set up. We can have lots of weird Zoom conversations with people. So getting ready for OCIs for me looks the same. It's about figuring out who is it that we'd really like to keep talking to in the recruitment process. And I guess what I'm thinking about is, there is a vibe in that booth, right? There's a vibe between, usually there's two people interviewing and there's a student, and the three of you get a little vibe going, hopefully, and you talk for 17 minutes and you're gone. And I'm thinking, well, gee, if Paula and I are interviewing together, is it going to be weird to have her in a Hollywood Square instead of next to me doing our shtick? But I mean, what we're all seeing is we're getting used to that now. So I don't think it's going to be that much different, I have to be honest. And in terms of the difference is, we won't be shaking hands, and we won't be, I guess that's it. We won't be shaking hands. And, but it'll be the same, I think. We all arrive. It'll take a minute or two to build rapport. We all know what that's like. And we'll do that in this format. Like right now, my screen has 3 people on it. We'll do it just the way we would have done it then. Bit of small talk, how's it going, yada, yada. And then you're in and you're talking. So I'm hoping it'll be the same. And in firms will be different, there's no doubt. But I haven't quite got there yet. And at this point, all I would say is, I think what we're just going to do is try to make that as comfortable for people as we can. That's what we're always doing, right? So instead of nervous people showing up in the reception area on the 9th floor of our building, we're going to think, how can we make it so people don't feel dorky and awkward, and they feel welcome and they can be there themselves in the meeting, and we'll figure that out in time. Yeah. But that's not too vague.
That's great. Thanks, Andrea. And I love this idea that you were talking about with we talked about a virtual handshake in our prep call. Kimberly mentioned that at the beginning of the meetings, that we can't do that, but that there's that exchange that starts the meeting, right? The exchange that allows everybody to become more comfortable, to get to know each other a little bit. So I thought that was a nice idea to keep in mind. Wonderful. So we're going to move into substantive prep. And Andrea, I'm going to lob this next question over to you. What signals to you that a student is appropriately prepared for an interview, be it an OCI, be it an in-firm interview? What are you looking for?
I'll start with OCIs because that's, as I keep saying, where my head is. And I want to be really honest. I mean, when somebody walks into my booth, I know about you. I've read your application. I have an understanding of what you might be bringing to Clark Wilson. I really expect you to kind of show up in the same way. And I don't mean that you know the details of my firm, or, you can't list out what all the 17 practice areas are. But I think by the time you come into my OCI booth, you're not asking questions about, how is the student program structured, or whether we have an insolvency practice. Those basic questions. You've read the website. In our case, all the details about the sort of structure of our student program are on our website. You should have read that and kind of ingested that a little bit, and be really now ready to talk about what it's like to work there as a student, or just some more general questions about our culture, our clients, etc. So for me, it's yeah, I think that's sort of a base level expectation, if I can put it that way. I feel like I've drifted from your question, Paula. I'm sorry.
No,
What
I
was the
think
question
this is really
again?
helpful. And Andrea, I'm going to ask you a follow-up on that question about the summer programs, because I feel like that's a question that students are very curious about. And so, and it's a great example of, maybe a question that would be that would show less preparation at an OCI, for example, would be, what is your student program versus maybe
Do you
I
have
rotate your student
rotations?
program.
How long is your student program? How many people are you hiring? That kind of stuff. They should know that already.
You should know exactly, but they may have a question about, maybe it's, and maybe I'm asking this as a question, but what if it is a question about the student program? I see that you do rotations.
Of
How
course.
have you found that impacts students? So
Yes. So to me, you'd be interested in knowing, what's it like to work there as a student? What kinds of work do students do? How do students engage? How do students get work? How do they go about getting their work? How do students typically work together? Where do students sit? What are what hours do you expect of students? So there's a squillion questions to ask about what it's like to work at any given firm. And frankly, I think those are the interesting questions, not asking about those basic details. So I didn't mean to be harsh about that. There is, I think, an expectation, just like any job interview, where everybody's done a little bit of homework and they're kind of ready to get into what's it like to work there, or what would it be like if you hired me, for example. What would you be getting if you hired me? We're into that now. Yeah.
exactly. And I might just ask a bit of follow-up too. When we met in September, you talked about how your firm has different criteria that they're looking for when they're interviewing students. Would you mind talking about that just a minute, just to give a bit of perspective on what's going through your mind as you're going through the OCIs, as you're going through the in-firm interviews?
Yeah, again, we have 5 criteria. They're on the website. One of them is grades, but there's another 4 criteria that we're looking at. So we've already seen your grades. You may want to comment on your grades, or, we might ask about grades. Don't be freaked out by that. If there's been some weird marks in your undergrad, or a real anomaly in your second year, as opposed to, like, whatever, we might ask about that. But we know where you've worked, and we know all that stuff. But the other criteria I think are important to pay attention to. I can't imagine they're much different at any other firm. So one is that you've got a really strong work ethic, right? So law firms you're basically signing on to an apprenticeship as a student. You're going to work hard, we hope, right? For your sake and for ours. It's a hard working gig, and we want people who are into it, who understand they're coming to work at a law firm in private practice. You're coming to do work for typically corporate clients, sometimes personal clients, who pay a lot of money for our services. So you're into that project. You want to be involved in this kind of high level work in a pretty intense way. You're into that. And you can demonstrate that you've done that before, that you've worked hard before, in whatever way that looks like. So we're going to ask questions that get into that really push a little bit on that. Tell us about times that you've worked really hard, or you've just been going flat out, and how was that for you? The second thing is teamwork, and being able to play well with others, to put the needs of the group first, to really be part of something, as opposed to shining your own star all the time. And so we'll ask questions about that. We can see all the things you've done, but where have you been able to demonstrate that you've worked as part of a team, which is a big part of legal practice. The third thing is self-awareness. And in other words, being coachable, being able to fall down, get up, make mistakes, learn, keep going. That's a huge part of legal practice. And it's a huge part of the first 3 years of your life as a lawyer, as a student, and then a lawyer. So understanding what you bring to the table, what you're good at, what you struggle with, and how willing you are to join the mix, like that, is really important. If somebody is busy trying to be perfect and all the time, and gets very defensive if they're learning. And when they're learning, that's a real challenge because you'll be making 1,000 mistakes a day, she says, in a hyperbolic kind of way. And then the fourth thing is, we call it professionalism, but it's really somebody's aptitude for working in a corporate environment. Most of the firms involved at OCI are pretty corporate in the sense that, you know, you're in a professional office where people are, maybe not so much these days, you're frocking up in, you know, corporate wear, meeting with clients who are paying a lot of money for what we're doing. And you're into that. That's what you want to do for the duration of your apprenticeship. And you are comfortable being with people from all walks of life, because clients and lawyers tend to be from all walks of life. So that's what we're kind of testing as well. That was a really long answer, Paula, I'm sorry. But so the questions we're asking are about that. We're testing that. And we could talk about, you know, the ways in which you should be testing us, you know. So if I'm going to work really hard and do all that stuff and learn my brains out and be really fabulous, what are you offering me in terms of an environment in which to do that? And that's where we get questions about, as Kimberly mentioned, what kind of mentoring do we get? What's it like? How, you know, how much do I have to pass in order to be comfy there? Or can I just be myself? That's where you should be pushing us, I think.
So excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea. I think those are all really great insights. And I could see Kimberly nodding her head, and, you know, I'm sure you could see me nodding mine. Just looking at the different, the types of questions, what it is that you're looking for, and what the students themselves, what they should be looking for. I had another question for you, Andrea, which was just some quick do's and don'ts, if you have any, in terms of the substantive prep.
Do's and don'ts.
And if not, we can come back to it, because
I think if you did nothing else, and I'm remembering last year, you know, pools of students, certainly, again, my head's in OCIs, or people sitting in a reception area, just take a minute to center yourself before that. I think that's what we all need to do. Just take that breath. When you're at home, it's great. You can like put on your favorite song and like totally get it out, like dance around your room or run around the block or step out for a breath of fresh air, things we can't do in a cheesy hotel ballroom. But just take that minute to center yourself and come back to yourself, because you're getting ready for an important conversation with people. And so that, you know, your best place is right here. That's what I would say. And I guess the other thing is be ready with some thoughtful questions. And it is painful when you get to a point in those 17 minutes, and it will come. I don't know when, maybe at 10 minutes or 12 minutes or 15 minutes, when we say, so do you have any questions for us? And the student doesn't have any questions or gets flustered, or, you know, it's just, you should be ready to engage in conversation as well. So a couple of really good questions it are important to have. Yeah.
It's so useful. And Andrea, you've talked about some questions today. In our last webinar, you had a whole host of beautiful questions. And so anybody who's having trouble thinking about what kind of questions they can ask, I'd encourage you to review that, just for some ideas about what it is. And ultimately, those questions obviously need to relate to what is most interesting to the student. Turning over to you, Kimberly, based on your experience with the Calgary recruit, what suggestions would you have for students going through the virtual process?
I think preparation is key. I think research is king. I think for students, like really being able to ask the good questions takes a lot of preparation. Yeah. And I think to Andrea's point, where we talk about, you know, getting past the initial pages of the website, like, you know that we have a formal rotation program, but then dig deeper. So what does that look like? And how does, same thing that Andrew talked about, how does work get distributed, that sort of thing. Really understanding the differences between us is going to be really key to your preparation. What is it? What are the industries? Where's where are we headed? Kind of the industries that we're looking at. What are we noted for? You know, what is the, and I don't want to encourage students to spend like so much time on this, but like, what are the things that, you know, some of the Lexperts, like what are we noted for? What are the things, like whether or not it's bench strength, or what does that look like for students, and what, like, those are the people that's going to be mentoring you. And don't be afraid to like ask those sorts of questions, like how would I have an opportunity to work with some of those, people who are highlighted in that or noted for, or I've seen, what you've done as a firm. You're really doing some interesting things in these areas. And as a student, how can we be involved? Do you have any advice on how we can like learn more about these areas to prepare for summer? Those sorts of things are really good things to think about. It's always one of my favorite questions to start things off is like, why do you want to come to BLG? And I would hope that students fundamentally can get to a really good meaty answer when we ask that question. So it would be the exact same as like, if Andrea asked, why do you want to come to Clark Wilson? Really thinking about a good, thoughtful answer to that. And again, applying what's important to you and thinking about those sorts of things that would resonate with you, and noting a firm for it. So, as an example, your firm has been noted for like the professional development. And this is something that I hold near and dear to my heart. Lifelong learning is very important to me. And I could see on your website that you've got an entire suite of professional development opportunities. And so those sorts of things are going to be something that I really encourage students to just sort of learn about, dig deeper.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Kimberly, you talked about sort of the way that you're approaching interviews, and Andrea talked about how her firm is approaching it. And I understand you're looking at, and I don't know if I got this wrong, but that you're looking at behavioral type questions. Is that right? And can you maybe explain what that is?
Sure, absolutely. And I think I want to be clear that every firm approach to interviewing is very, very different. And what we would like to do is try and get to a point where we try and remove as much bias as possible through the interview process. And how do you do that is like thinking about standardized questions and behavioral description questions. And let's face it, as a market, like we're still really behind in terms of how we assess candidates. Like we've got work to do. I completely acknowledge that. But at the same time, what can we do to sort of try and level the playing field a little bit more for students? And how does that work is like really thinking about like good questions that you could ask every single candidate so that you can apply an apples to apples comparison. So a behavioral description question falls on the fact that sometimes past behavior dictates future behavior. So if you're asking a behavioral description question, and what I would like to do is same test on the same, like the criteria that Andrea holds near and dear to Clark Wilson's heart, whether it's teamwork, resilience, hard work. What does that look like? And so a lot of those questions are framed like, tell me a time when, tell me about a situation when. And there's methodology to answering those questions, and students should really look that up. It's called the STAR method. So it's really easy, but I want an arc, like I want a story. And tell me about the situation, how you reacted to it, what actions did you take, what was your part in all of this? And really, like, I just want you to tie it all up with a nice little bow and tell me at the end of the day, what was your learning from it? And it didn't need to be like a positive outcome. So even if it was like it ended up being a very disastrous experience for you, what was your life lesson? Like, what was your lesson from that? What did you get from that? And how can you apply what you learned from that into a career in law or your summer program? Or how did that better you as a person? How did you reset, and how did you adapt and pivot from that situation? So so really, like, there's a science to answering that question. And I always tell students to come with like 3 solid stories that you can come to an interview that you can like, and think of the stories as like the jackknife of all stories. If I ask you any behavioral description question, you could use the story to pivot towards resilience or teamwork or something to that effect. But really thinking about what you can use, and that's all part of your preparation for these interviews. Come up with 3 great stories that you can use that really like speak to your abilities.
Thank you so much.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best prep. Like, you put all of that work into your resume. Now look at your resume and start pulling stories out. I go further. I say there should be 5 stories.
Yeah.
You know, tell like which, because it might not be the 5 years that you spent in some fancy government job every summer. It might be the time that you stayed home for 6 months to care for an ailing family member, or it might be the year that you were at McDonald's and learned about, you know, whatever. But pull those stories out for us, because that's, yeah, I agree. Sorry.
I think that's really useful. And I think for the students who are watching, I know I've Googled behavioral questions before, and there are resources that are available online that can give you some examples of what a behavioral question looks like. And you can Google STAR method to hear what type of answer it is that an employer might be looking for. And you know, I'm not an expert in any of this, but you know, I understand there's sort of that key thing, right? You, as the question receiver, might listen to that question and think, okay, you need to then identify, is it resilience, is it teamwork, what exactly is it that the interview is trying to ask me about, and then you can match your story to the question. So I think that's really, really helpful, Kimberly and Andrea, for the students that are going through the process.
And those stories are good even if you don't have an interviewer who's asking you fancy behavioral questions. I mean, if you have an interviewer who's like lobbing lame questions like, well, you know, tell me about yourself, or how did you enjoy working at Save On, right? At least then you've got some really well-crafted answers. So it's not just about meeting behavioral interviewing, it's the story theme. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and I was just going to say, I think these stories also, I mean, Kimberly, you would know better than me, but those stories are going to help you engage. The more you can share about your experiences, and the more you know your stories, the more confidence you have in what you're communicating, the more that will come through when you're communicating with somebody in this virtual context. So I'm excited to turn to the next and last sort of formal topic, which is virtual etiquette. And I've had a peek into the Q&A, and I see there's a number of them that actually do touch on etiquette as well. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. And this question next is for you, Kim, which is, what would you recommend as best practices for virtual interviews?
I think it's really important. I referenced the fact that you need to think about like the whatever distractions might be around you. So thinking about, like, if you can, a neutral background, alleviating sort of. I had a student once go through a virtual interview with an overhead fan going on, and it was just I focused on the fan instead of the student. So just removing those sorts of distractions, making sure your camera angle is so that I can see you full faced. And so I know some students have had interviews where they've done it on their tablet, but it's, you know, placed on the table, and the angle kind of goes up into so I just want to be able to like get the full experience of chatting with you like in any other conversation that we would normally have, and making sure that you project, if you can, through the screen. And what does that look like? It's just a matter of like putting some energy behind your answers and your voice. Don't be afraid to use any sort of hand gestures to emphasize a point. I think it's important. Just because it's a virtual interview does not mean it has to be stilted in any way, shape, or form. So really thinking about like what comes naturally to you when you have a good conversation are some of the behaviors that you should emulate when you go into a virtual interview. If you are like at a point where you feel like it's almost manic, then just like take a minute and just reset and just check yourself, and just like, you know, take the energy back down where you can like portray a very like your true authentic professional self.
Beautiful. And Kim, I'm actually going to jump in with one of the live questions because I feel like this is very much on topic. We have an anonymous question with 6 upvotes, so lots of people want to know, what are your recommendations for eye contact? Is it a major faux pas to be looking at your interviewer on the screen rather than straight at the webcam?
Well, hopefully that your camera aligns with where your interviewers are at. And I know it can get a little tricky, and I always make a point of trying to like make sure the screens and the cameras all align so that I can look at faces while I'm talking, because that's where you feel like the engagement is happening. So try and see if you can make that happen. And but if you're not have that situation, then look into the camera. Make sure that you're like looking and engaged with your interviewers so that you can emulate as best as you can as natural a conversation as you can in this process. So look into the cameras would be and Andrea had a great tip the other day. If it's distracting to you, turn off your self view so that you can
100%.
focus on the interviewers, so that you're not distracted that, my hair is out of place, or like, whatever that might be. Focus on the conversation. So remove those distractions.
Super. Thank you, Kim. I have another tip that I use, which is, and I'm doing it right now. I bring the little images so that they're all into the center of my screen. So I may not be looking exactly into somebody's eyes, but I feel like it helps me not have my eyes going off to the side at least. So that's another trick that you can use on this type of, if the platform allows it. Carrying on with body language, there's another question here. I was given a tip to try to show enough of your body on camera so they can at least see our arms, since that helps with the nonverbal communication. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I use my hands naturally. Like, you're going to see them as I talk, and if that's going to help me emphasize a point or show energy or show engagement or even show that I'm listening and I'm understanding and hearing your question, then whatever comes naturally to you. The worst thing was for you to sit on your hands and not be able to use them when that's something that comes very naturally to you. So if you want to have your hands visible and your arms visible, that's definitely a personal choice for you. But if you use your hands and your gestures naturally and it emphasizes what you're saying, then by all means, I think then think about strategically placing your camera angle so that you can see your hands and your arms.
Super. Kimberly, there's one other question here about sort of this etiquette piece. Does pausing once a question has been asked signal that the interviewee is thinking or instead not prepared?
No, I like the pause, to be frank. I sometimes and it could be very different from every interviewer. I just want to know that the student is just thinking about the answer, and they're thinking about like providing the most thoughtful answer. And you might know it right away and it can just roll right off. But if it is a behavioral description question and you have to like take a minute to think about it, then take that pause, think about it, and then deliver like a really good fulsome answer.
Beautiful.
Andrea, do you have any view one way or the other on that?
I love a pause. And I mean, I think I agree with you. I love a pause. And I'm often, when I'm talking to people, encouraging them to, especially if you're more extroverted, to just give yourself that beat. It's really easy to signal to somebody that you're thinking, like we all do it naturally, like, oh, okay, you're obviously thinking about it. It's really important. Yeah. I think that I really think the gift, I can't stress enough how much it's changed things for me to turn off that self-view, because in real life, if you're sitting in an interview, you are not looking in a mirror. You are not, so I see people, it's a real turn off. We've all seen it, right? You can see someone looking at themselves and they're worried, they're worried about their hair and they've just decided to move their chair because the lighting's not right. It's a real turn off. So take that minute to make sure you're in position and you're comfy with where you are, and then turn it off and don't look at yourself. And just back to Kim's earlier point, I think in terms of how much of your arms or body you should see, I think the only way you can do that is to practice with a friend. Get on Zoom with a friend who understands this process and just get feedback. How does it look? What do you see behind me? Do you think I should be, you know, get all the positioning right, get your computer set up exactly right, so then you can relax on the day. You shouldn't be making those adjustments in the meeting, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And then if your career services office provides the opportunity to do a mock interview, please like take advantage of that resource. Your CSOs are well versed in all of the techniques that you should be thinking about, even from like behavioral description questions. So don't hesitate to use that as a resource.
Yeah. I think these are all excellent suggestions. And one that I would add to the mix is to do your own video. You can record yourself on Zoom. It's very easy and you can watch it. And it might be a really good learning experience because you'll notice things that you may not have noticed before.
Yep.
There's a question. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. And then I forgot to mention this. Is just thinking about sort of your nervous habits, and making sure, like, you know, if you're in a chair that swivels, that you like lock that chair in place. Because there's just one more tip that from my experience from the virtual OCIs that we did in the fall, just making sure you anchor yourself, and that's for any interview. Anchor yourself. Put your feet
on the
down.
ground.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, I want to reassure, if you were in live meetings, you'd have tics too. You know, we all have them. So you might be swinging your leg or fiddling with your scarf. So don't worry about it more than you need to, I think. Just focus on the conversation. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm going to move to the next question, but before that, there is something in the live Q&A about where one might find the earlier webinar with Kimberley and Andrea, and I'll send a link to that. It's on my YouTube channel, but I'll send a link to everybody who's here today, who's registered for the webinar. Turning over to you, Andrea. My last question for each of you before we get to the questions on the Q&A. What final words of advice do you have for students going through this process?
I guess there is a lot of this finicky little prep that's really important, and it's no different from any other year, right? We talked about how you're dressing, how you're looking, you know, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, just try to stay focused on what's happening, right? You are trying, and everyone's different. Some people have gobsmacking, ridiculous resumes and experiences. They know that they'll be beating firms off with a stick. Some people are in the middle somewhere. Some people are really hoping to get a few OCI. Like, we're all in a different place. But at the end of the day, you're just trying to get to know people and get a sense of whether you want to work there and be your best self so that you can work there. I know it sounds silly. We talked about it in our other video. You're going through this weird task of taking a nameless bunch of corporate firms and slowly bringing them into focus. And as Kimberley said, it does happen naturally. So just focus on that. So just focus on, do I like these people? Do they seem kind? Do they seem like they're doing the kind of work I want to do? It's like it's a relationship that you're building. It's not like if you swing your leg or stuff up a tech thing that they're going to write you off. It's not like that. It's a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
I would agree.
I was going to ask you the same question, Kim. Any sort of last word of advice?
Think about, like, you're bringing forward your best professional, authentic self. The hard work comes from you understanding yourself the best. That to me is the toughest piece. So really, like, what we talked about before is really taking an inventory of like what's important to you. And then bringing that to the interview. And then my second piece of advice is to have an open mind about it all. And recruit is a funny thing. It's not an exact science, but I see it every single year where students like really open themselves up to the possibilities, and their minds get changed every single year. Sometimes they're so singularly focused on certain firms, and then they didn't know about like the opportunities at other places, and until they go through the experience, they just didn't know. So like open mind about it all.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn to the Q&A box now and ask a few questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll see how far we get. This question has seven votes, but is it helpful to continue to reach out to the firms now before we hear back from OCIs?
What does that mean, Kim?
I guess it depends on the market, whether or not there's a blackout from a hearing from, so you've got to, be mindful of those rules too. But if you're trying to still learn about the firm in preparation for your OCIs, then yeah, I would, depending on the firm, I'm a big advocate of like learning about the firm. So reaching out, like all of my students are all on their websites, reach out to students. Alum is a great place to start. The alum always want to help, like, students that came from their alma mater. So making sure that you're learning about the firm. So from my perspective, don't hesitate to continue reaching out until you get to a point where you can learn about the firm and ask good questions. So, but some firms may not have the same resources. And so you have to be mindful and respectful of time and your asks. So just thinking about that. It's a fine line.
I'm thinking about, I didn't mean to wrinkle my nose. I think what I'm thinking about is just understanding the rhythm of what happens within student recruiting teams, right? So we know your rhythms. We know when you're studying for exams. We know when you're just getting ready, all that stuff. And so, for example, right now, all of these floods of applications have come in. We're reviewing them. We're thinking about OCIs. So I'm going to be honest, right now, my team doesn't have the resources to arrange another few meetings for you to meet some more of our lawyers. It's been a 14-month recruit. I think it's not that ship has sailed, but we don't have, that's not really where our head is right now. So be patient, I guess, with people. And yeah, I hope it was okay to say that.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I guess it's all dependent on resources available and timing. So it always serves the student well if you start the process early.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there were some other resources, Andrea, that you mentioned when we spoke earlier, that students that maybe it's not maybe it's not the best moment to reach out because the firms are not necessarily able to respond in the same way as they might at another time, but that students have other students at their law schools that they can connect with who will be able to share information about the law firm, their career services advisors, the law firm website. So there are other avenues to learn more about a particular firm if that's what it is that they're seeking. Fabulous, thank you.
We're talking about after you've applied, after you've actually sent in your application. Is that what we're talking about?
The question is, it doesn't really specify. Is would it be helpful to continue to reach out to the firms now before we hear back for OCIs?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think different firms will have, depending on where they're at in their cycles, just like the students will have differences in their cycles, times that are more that work better than others.
Yeah, no, and if I can just touch on this really quickly, Paula, I know, in different circumstances, we would send our teams out to meet students. We'd go to the career fairs, we'd meet students at reception, like we'd have that opportunity to have that one-on-one in-person contact. Based on sort of my experience on the virtual platforms with the varying career fairs that we've had at all the different schools, like the touch points with students are so limited this year. So I get why you're trying to learn more about us. You have not had the opportunity to have those conversations that you would have in the past. So I completely understand. And I have a real soft spot for, especially for this year, for students trying to learn, and especially in Calgary in particular, for first year students going through recruitment right now. Like, your touch points with firms have been so minimal. So I completely understand. So
So in
do
that,
the outreach.
yeah, so in that situation, Kim, you mentioned in your case for your firm that the students are on the website, that they're open and available to be contacted. And I gather, would other firms have a similar setup, or would it, I mean, would it just depend on the firm? Do you know anything else about that?
No, regular. I think most of the firms encourage students to reach out to other students, and I think, there's a reason why we have the student profiles on our pages, so that you can have that as a resource to you and available to have that extra conversation to prepare for your OCI or prepare to get an application in. So I encourage you to use that resource.
Beautiful, thank you.
I think it's probably worth waiting to find out whether you got an OCI interview first. I'm just thinking right now, students are waiting to hear in Vancouver, they're waiting to hear whether they got an interview. And so I'm not really sure how it would benefit anybody to be meeting more people, you know what I mean? But if you know you've got an interview and you feel like you've got more prep work to do, yeah, I'm okay, maybe. Yeah.
I guess it all depends on like the timing of the cycle in each of your respective markets that you're recruiting in, right? So at Andrea's stage, it's just difficult to make those arrangements now when they're preparing for the OCIs. Whereas, in my case, the application portal is still open. Applications are still getting received. We're not done yet. So in that sense, I guess it all depends on where each of the centers are.
Absolutely. So I'm noticing that we're just past 1 o'clock our time. So maybe there's one last question I'll ask, and then we'll wrap it up. Is that okay with you, Andrea?
Yes, I'm just checking my time. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm good.
super. And then we'll wrap it up. And it's this question: how easy or hard is it to stick to the 17-minute OCI timing during the Calgary recruit?
We did the request with the schools to try and lengthen that time from 17 minutes to minimally 20 minutes, just in case. So just so we had just a few extra minutes to like address any tech issues that we might have had. So I'm not sure whether or not through the Vancouver and Toronto processes, you have the benefit of like the 20-minute intervals, but
I think that's what they're doing.
yeah, it made all the difference in the world just to even, use your opening as that handshake. But we actually stayed very true to the schedule.
Fabulous. And I think that's it. There are more questions. I wish we had more time to answer them, but I want to be respectful of our presenters and of all our students' time. So we're going to call it a day. But I just wanted to say a big thank you, Kimberly and Andrea. It was so lovely to reconnect with you and to have this conversation, to have this discussion. Thank you to all the students who are out there, and good luck, and great work. So glad to see you here. I will send out a recording of this webinar and a link to the other webinar as well for those of you who are interested in, sharing it, watching it again, doing what you need to do to really prepare. And I think some of the things that we learned today, just about spending that time to get to know yourself, to get to know what it is that you're looking for, asking the questions to elicit that information from the lawyers and the representatives at law firms who will share that with you. I think it's all really just amazing advice. So thanks again, Andrea and Kim. It's so great to have you here today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you. All right. Well, it was lovely to see you, and best wishes to everybody. I'm going to end the webinar now and wish all of you the best of luck. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.